Okay, we're all set. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 2021 edition of our monthly webinar series. My name is Chris Pankowich, and I'm the Research and Knowledge Lead here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. I'm really excited, very appreciated today for the efforts that have gone into making this webinar a reality. As you may or may not know, we have decided that one of our major deliverables for this year is going to be a toolkit focused on student athlete mental health. And this webinar is serving as sort of an unofficial kickoff to the work being done on that initiative. The topic of student athlete mental health has gradually been receiving more attention in recent years. And much like any other population of students, the needs of student athletes have some commonalities, but also much diversity. We often look to our athletes as these exemplars of strength, determination, and perseverance, and often this is for good reason. The narratives built around our athletes often involve these, completing these superhuman tasks or overcoming very unbeatable odds. And what can sometimes be lost in these narratives is the humanity of our athletes and the daily struggles they may face balancing athletic careers, academic pursuits, and transitioning from different phases of life. So in this webinar, we seek to highlight the voice of some of these athletes, along with those who dedicate their professional lives to supporting these students throughout their athletic careers. With that being said, I'm going to take a quick moment to share a brief land acknowledgement before we move on. We are all viewing and participating in this webinar on traditional territories of Indigenous people of Turtle Island. Our special guests will be sharing their knowledge, and we want to recognize the contributions of everyone to this place and express our gratitude for our ability to come together and learn today. Before moving on to meeting our guests, I do have a few housekeeping notes. The first, we will be fielding audience questions at the end of the webinar. I would like to draw everyone's attention to the bottom of the screen. You're going to see both a Q&A feature and a chat feature. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions for the panelists. We will try to get to as many of those questions as possible at the end of the webinar. For all other inquiries or comments, please use the chat function. We encourage you to use this throughout the webinar to connect with each other, share thoughts and perspectives as the presentation is occurring. And finally, a brief follow-up survey will be sent to you via email after the session, and it will be greatly appreciated if you can fill that out. At this point, I would like to pass the torch on to each of my guests today. We've managed to pull together quite an eclectic group, each of whom has their own story to tell, both as a student athlete in post-secondary and whose paths in life have largely been shaped by those experiences. With that being said, I would first like to introduce Alex Salome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for having me today. This is a really great opportunity to talk about some of the work that we're doing in student athlete mental health, and I think this toolkit is going to be a great tool for many of the folks who you work with, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of that. As Chris mentioned, my name is Alex Salome. I'm the Talk Today Program and Communications Manager. Talk Today is one of the most comprehensive mental health programs in the country, and I'm also a former post-secondary athlete. I played 2 years of U of T rugby, so really excited to be here and excited to hear what some of my colleagues are also going to be saying and my fellow panelists here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Next up, I have Alexandra Rukin. Welcome.
Rukin, Chris.
Oh, Rukin. My apologies.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Rukin. I'm currently a master's student at Western University studying biosciences, focusing mainly on pregnancy, mental health, self-compassion. I currently work in the exercise and pregnancy lab under Dr. Michelle Matola and the body image health lab under Ava Pila. So I'm just super excited to be here. For me specifically, I'll be talking about my background in sports and eating disorders and overall mental health.
Thanks so much, Alex. And Matthew Arnon, welcome.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. I am many things. I like to identify as just a human, just like everybody else, but by trade, professional soccer athlete. And why I'm here is I do have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, which is all fine and dandy, but what I really pride myself on is a specialization in mindfulness meditation, bringing that full circle into my athlete journey, not just as a pro athlete, but as a collegiate athlete, 5 years at York University with the men's soccer team, and pairing that with the human that's underneath the jersey. And I think that exploration of myself led me to becoming the founder, the creator of Mindframe, which is a mental fitness program for athletes. And the next guest is a very special person on my journey, and a big mentor of mine. And I'm very happy to continue working with him into transitioning into a very holistic program in the performance wellness space. And that's all, but I'm just very excited to be here, and very excited to be in action and be an advocate for change in the student athlete mental health space.
Very well said, Matthew. Thank you for being here. And James, last but not least, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having all of us, for having me. It's a great honor, really humbled to be here. And Matt kind of touched on it. I've been a lot of things. I am a lot of things, but we're stripping away all those titles and getting down to the basics of human first approach to student athlete care and mental health. My background is as an athletic therapist, a strength and conditioning specialist with a master's degree in health science and kinesiology, as well as a yoga practitioner and instructor and founder, creator of First Star Therapy. That's where we're at right now, but moving towards this alignment with Matt and Mindframe Fit, and we have put a physical and mental health practice together that really drives home that message of removing the singular identity and finding the commonality in all of us that is human, and exploring, the sliding scale of mental health and how self-advocacy and really resilience truly builds outcomes. So tons of experience with thousands of amazing varsity athletes in the past, and injuries along with those things that have all been taken into consideration in development of this. So again, really appreciate everybody's time and being here, and for having us on. Look forward to chatting.
Thank you, James, and I appreciate you alluding to that idea of singular identities. I think that's going to be coming up at a couple of points in our discussion today. So I appreciate it, and welcome, and thank you for being here as well. Prior to moving on, I thought, Alex, we could come back to you. A little more information about the Talk Today program. I know you and I, obviously both working within the CMHA organization, have had a chance to talk a little bit about it. And something that was a bit of a precursor to us even thinking, hey, we need to do our toolkit focus on the student athlete experience, was a conversation you and I had about what you've noticed through the Talk Today program, especially over the pandemic, as a lot of athletic programs have been disrupted. If you don't mind, I'll pass it along to you to provide our audience with a little bit of context, and also some of your firsthand knowledge of what you've been seeing when it comes to the mental health of those young athletes.
Thanks, Chris. So, as I mentioned earlier, Talk Today is one of the most comprehensive mental health and sport-related programs in Canada. It was started by the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario Division as a pilot with the Ontario Hockey League. A lot of the work has since grown from then. We started in 2014, and following our successful pilot, we were able to branch out to the entire Canadian Hockey League, to the Canadian Junior Hockey League, which are the two highest tiers of junior hockey in Canada. And we've also since expanded to now begin supporting post-secondary institutions. We've got a few partnerships with post-secondary institutions. Our first one was with Sioux College back in the 2016-17 year. And there's really quite a bit to how the program functions. Our aim, of course, is to promote the mental health of young athletes, but it's also to spread awareness about the benefits of positive mental health throughout communities and on campuses across the country. Sorry, Chris, if you could just go to the next slide. Sure. The next piece is kind of how we've structured the program. We've really built the program around four main components, three of which are delivered directly by local CMHA branches, but they're always done in partnership with our local campuses in this particular case. And the idea behind it is to provide education, support, awareness, and then the mental health champion piece at the bottom, which would be more of a role that our local campuses play. Now, building a little bit on these components, the mental health and suicide awareness training that we provide is Safe Talk. Some of the folks on this call might be familiar with this. It's a suicide prevention training, suicide awareness training, and the idea behind it is we had looked for something that can help provide both strike a balance with the incredibly active schedules that athletes generally have, but something that's also substantive enough that athletes can really benefit from the educational experience. And Safe Talk was something that was widely available. It's internationally recognized and something that benefits a lot of folks. And what we've done with this training is we've structured it where every athlete is who participates in the program is expected to take the training. The training acts in really as in two ways. It helps build relationships with the athletes. It helps our local branches build connections with the athletes, and it helps provide education for them. The next piece we have is our mental health coach, who generally delivers the suicide prevention training. And what we've done with this component, again, it's something that, particularly in the campus context, we've adapted significantly, where generally it's a relationship between the mental health coach and somebody at the university or college that we work with. Sometimes the mental health coach is the lead resource for athletes. So if they're looking for support and they don't know where to find it, they can reach out to this mental health coach, and that person acts as a liaison to resources, whether they be on campus or in the community, depending on the context of the request. Then what we've also done is, if, for example, say there are a lot of counselors who are interested in participating on campus, we can also build that relationship there, where maybe a counselor would act as the mental health coach locally on campus, and then they would also have a contact in the community through their local CMHA. The final piece we have is our Campus Talk Today events. These are more fun events that we do with usually one team from every one male, one female team from every campus. And the way we structured that piece as well is to really just work with the athletes to help promote mental health on campus. And the idea here, again, is not to just promote resources at CMHA, it's to to promote all resources that are available, whether they be on campus, through our local branches, or if people require additional information for other resources that maybe our branches don't provide that service, raise that awareness with them. And then the final piece is our mental health champion. This is a piece where we usually ask our partners to help us identify a few people within either the athletics department or coaches or trainers that the athletes feel particularly comfortable with. And what we try to do with this piece is their sort of our branch connection to the teams. So if something may have happened in the community and we want to get information out to the teams, they would be our first point of contact where we can make those connections. And vice versa, if an athlete feels like they need to reach out for support, there's somebody who has that information on hand and can make those connections within the community or on campus. So that's just a little bit of a breakdown of how the Talk Today program works. To your question about what we've noticed with the pandemic, and this has certainly been a huge challenge for us, because a lot of the foundational elements of our program are built on those personal relationships in the community. So the local branches that deliver the program will always be the ones who generally either deliver the training or participate in it, so that the athletes know who to reach out to. And our biggest challenge has been with being online. We can't deliver our in-person trainings. And
sorry guys, I just dropped off the connection there for a second. You were transitioning to my question. I'm just going to start sharing my screen again and make sure we're still recording, still broadcasting. My apologies for that, Alex. If you don't mind, if we just backtrack it one moment to when you were transitioning to what you've noticed within the communities regarding since the pandemic, that would be greatly appreciated. And again, my apologies to everyone in the audience if you lost all of us for a second there.
No problem at all. So as I was saying, yeah, so we've been greatly impacted by the pandemic in a lot of senses, just in the sense of how the program is delivered. The foundational elements of the program are built around these direct connections with our local teams. In this case, it would be local campuses, and the inability to meet in person and deliver these trainings has been a huge challenge for us. While we're still able to do a lot of things virtually, in some cases, it really varies from branch to branch, where we would provide just overarching mental health information. The training itself is structured around in person, so we can't deliver safe talk training virtually. So what we've done is we've looked to other methods to connect with athletes, and generally it has been a challenge because everybody is a little bit more spread out. I know some folks, in some cases, they've had their athletes return to campus just to train in the hopes of there being a season. Others have had haven't had their athletes return, and the sort of breakdown where everyone's very separate, it's very hard to provide certain resources. But what we have done is we've really put more of an emphasis this year, as opposed to suicide prevention. We've focused a lot more with many of our partners, not just our campus partners, on the challenges around grief and loss. And this has been a growing theme, and it's not just something athletes are experiencing, it's something many of us are experiencing with the pandemic. And to some extent, you might even see that athletes are experiencing it more because of the limited nature of how long an athletic career can be, and also expectations that athletes have had of participating this coming year, whether it's the athlete who was in his last year of university and is no longer going to be able to play after that year, or the athlete who is looking for their first attempt and may have been recruited by a school and lost out on an opportunity to play their sport that they've been training and working so hard in. And as an athlete, I mean, I was never at that elite level, but it's certainly something that struck home with me, because I know that for me in particular, it was a conscious decision to move on from my sport when I had stopped playing after my first 2 years of playing rugby at U of T. But for many, this is in a sense a situation where they're being forced to not play, and in some case forced retirement for those who are leaving their sport and we're not looking to pursue it afterwards. So there's certainly a lot of challenges, and what we try to make sure we remind everybody is that it's okay to feel this way. And it's certainly important that if you do feel like you need support, or if you are struggling, that these are important issues, and that you should feel comfortable talking about it.
Very well said, Alex. And your last point there, the idea that grief and loss can be applied to, these transitionary life phases, and even, these identities around what we do in the world is really important. And I think highlighting that it is indeed a process, and even though it may not be a conventional use of the term that we know it as, it's very much being highlighted over the past year in a number of life domains. So I appreciate that. And maybe for the audience who's been listening and heard some of this information about your program and would like to connect with you, if you could maybe drop some information in the chat for those that might want to reach out and ask more, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Definitely, I'd be happy to. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And just for the audience members, we're going through a little bit of a spotlight on each of the guests today. And after that, we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion. So you will be hearing from Alex again a little bit later on in the presentation. Thanks again, Alex.
Thank you.
Alexandra, I would love to turn the attention over to you. I know we've had the chance to connect somewhat frequently, I guess, over the past few months in advance of this session, and I've gotten a chance to learn more about your life and your competitive athletic career, as well as your focus now. So I've just got a slide up there with a few highlights of your journey in life so far, and I'd love to, if you want, take a few moments to talk a little bit more to your life experiences thus far, and I have a few questions for you that I think the audience would love to hear about.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll start with, so I did my undergrad in kin. So did most of my friends and colleagues who played sports. We just kind of correlated our passion for sports to something more academic related. So that's why I pursued kinesiology. I didn't anticipate on doing a master's. It was at the back of my head, but it just happened. I did want to continue the academia route in the sense that I wanted to learn more about myself. and kind of answer the whys and hows and where did things go wrong, where did things go right. My entire life I was very active. My parents jokingly tell me all the time that when I was a kid I didn't learn how to crawl, I just got up and ran. I was misdiagnosed with ADHD, ADD. My parents, old school Europeans, they didn't really believe in the healthcare system and just the whole prescription, like prescribing me drugs like at a really young age. So they just thought I'd eventually let all that energy out some way. I did. I played sports. So that was I wasn't the best academically. I was always behind. I was trilingual. I grew up with, immigrant parents who both spoke different languages. So one side Serbian and Croatian, the other side's Romanian, and I barely knew English very well until later on. Aside from that, I just developed this huge passion towards sports. I played everything from track, cross country, volleyball, basketball. I did competitive swimming for most of that time, but aside from swimming, I did a bunch of other extracurricular sports. High school, same thing. I went and traveled to Italy for a term, a lot of growth there, independence, matured a lot, kind of, motivated me to focus more on school, I guess, because as a kid, I was just super insecure. I always kind of suffered with identity issues in the sense that I never really knew what my purpose was for a very long time. Even now at 24, I still struggle with that, really understanding like what my true passions and interests are, what my purpose of living in general is. Am I supposed to help people? Am I supposed to help myself? Like, what is it? Hence why I'm doing a master's. But in terms of sports, it kind of came with its ups and downs. It really challenged me. That's kind of why I developed that passion for it, because it was something that not only was it a de-stress, the social aspect was amazing. I got to meet a lot of great people through sports. I played a variety of sports, so you're going to meet all sorts of athletes, coaches, leaders. But then also it comes with its pressures and standards and critiques and all the other nitty gritty stuff that no one really discusses about. So that's why I'm here now doing my master's, to kind of, although right now I'm focusing on pregnancy and postpartum, that's a different story. I just developed like a huge passion for women's health in general, just because of the limited research done on female subjects. That's kind of why I wanted to pursue the research route and to do my thesis on women. But it was just kind of a way to better understand my history and to help women, athletes, everyone, not just women or just athletes in general, better understand, our psychology or our motive and what the true definition of health is, and how it's been so skewed in society. These developed societal cultural norms and standards we kind of conditioned ourselves to accustom to, when no one really told you to live that certain way. No one told you to be that type of athlete. No one told you to be that perfect student. It's very interesting stuff. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. And, as you're talking, I think, I definitely felt, and I'm sure many people listening felt, like this is showing a really eclectic snapshot of the whole person behind all of these athletic pursuits, right? I'm seeing competitive swimmer, competitive rower, competitive power lifter. And yet all of these other things are going on with you from all these different perspectives. And you and I have talked a little bit about this sort of double-edged sword that athletics can be for someone who maybe aligns with certain things. You mentioned that structure and that desire for the competition. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just quickly touch on, when thinking about your own mental health journey, when have these athletic pursuits and maybe these more competitive environments really helped you in that regard? And when have you noticed it's sort of maybe hindered or caused some challenges for you?
Right. So thanks, Chris. So I just developed that passion for sport because, to me, when I was younger, if I wasn't the greatest academically. At least I could be, I used my other strengths to my advantage. So I knew that I had very good athletic skills and I was very active and I had a true passion for it. Every day was just something different, and it kept me motivated, and it was used kind of a de-stress. Like I remember going on my first run ever in my entire life because I don't know what was going on at the time, but I remember just being so overwhelmed with, thoughts that I needed to let out, and I didn't want to really talk about it vocally. I wanted to just physically let it out. So I ran, I don't know how long, but it felt really good. So I just stuck to it, and I used sports and activity kind of as a stressor, a de-stressor. And so it helped me at the time. I think when it hindered my mental health, it's when I started using competitive sports and physical activity as a negative coping mechanism, and also a way to live up to those standards. So because I said I was very athletic, I'm also the only girl in like a huge family of just men. And, there was a lot of pressure being the only female and the one that was very active, fit, and doing all these things that no one else was doing. And I was highly idolized for that. And as a teenager or a young adolescent, it's kind of this ego booster, and you become, you start to develop these narcissistic tendencies, and you become a little bit more egotistic because you're feeding off these compliments. There's nothing wrong with letting all that, absorbing all that, and hearing words of affirmation and accepting it. But it's another thing when you're using that to I thought that was my identity. I was just that fit chick that did a bunch of sports and, was studying kinesiology. Like that's who I was. And I was so afraid that what if one day I stopped playing sports, or what if like my whole life was a lie? The only reason why I did this was for other people. And because I got to, I received so many compliments and people idolized me. It was very self-objectifying. I was very heavily sexualized physically. I'll go to grab groceries and the cashier will be like, "You have an amazing body. I'll get blood work done." And the nurses are all staring at me and they're like, "You look amazing. You must work out." I'm not kidding. Like that happens on a daily basis. And, there's nothing wrong with hearing these things. And it took me a long time to kind of accept it and not resent people for these things, because it's not like they know my backstory, but it eats you up inside. And that's kind of when it started hindering me, especially when I started powerlifting. The reason why I did that was because I developed a passion for working out after high school, because I stopped playing sports. So I wanted to do something active. So that's why I turned to working out at the gym. I loved it. And I did everything that society told you was normal at the gym and how you should look, that whole bodybuilding fitness mentality and their philosophies. You just thought that was normal and you just wanted to look like them. So you did whatever it took. When I was powerlifting, I was stubborn. And like I said, I like to challenge myself. I'm like, why can't I look aesthetically pleasing and lift strong? So then I started dieting, and I started, it was like this cycle of obsession. And then that led to body dysmorphia and over criticizing yourself when no one cares what you're doing, really. Like no one cares, but you're just so obsessed with making people happy. And it was just, so the last, I guess, at the end of my powerlifting career, I guess I'd say I stopped it because I didn't like it anymore. I ended up hating the sport, not because the sport's bad or anything. It's just kind of, I turned such a great sport into something I resented because it was very self-induced. But it all comes down to, trying to live up to society's standards, their thin ideals, their norms, like how they generalize, and they created these, physical norms, and shaming athletes for being a certain way because it's not normal. So that's when it really hindered my mental health, is when I just became overly obsessed with making other people happy. And I forgot that the reason why I did it in the first place was just for me. But, you know, it accumulates and it hits you like a rock. So you don't even see it coming.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing it. And I don't know if anyone else in the audience is feeling it, but just the power behind your story and your experiences is, it's very, very much something to reflect on. And I think you touched on so many components. And just as one last quick question for you, and this is a big topic, but I know you and I have touched on it a little bit. We've talked about your experiences and your community in the world of powerlifting, and maybe some people in the audience are familiar with it. Maybe people have no idea. It's not sort of one of the more conventional, glamorized sports that's out there. But you and I have talked about the culture around what could be considered disordered eating that kind of permeates the not just powerlifting, but maybe even like bodybuilding, that type of domain culture. I'm curious to know, and not something specifically to the female athlete, but in general, like what have you noticed in that world as sort of normalized in terms of things around diet, nutrition, food that you would say is sort of, again, goes from extremes to extreme, or maybe what we could maybe call disordered behavior?
Yeah, so before I get into this, if anyone is currently suffering from any eating disorder, body image issues, or if this topic may be triggering in any certain way, by all means, you can log off and then log back in like 5-10 minutes. But yeah, so powerlifting, there's not a huge discussion revolving around eating disorders just because it's a strength-based sport. So you're just assessed on your squat, bench, deadlift. It's also not a huge sport. I mean, everyone's heard about it, but it's not in the Olympics. It's not. Olympic lifting is, but powerlifting's not. They do have a lot of competitions, and it's more popular in the US than in Canada. But for me, like I said, when I started working out, it was just so I can stick to that regimen. I was used to my entire life with just being physically active. And it's come something especially with social media, you use it. It's such a great tool to use, but it's also very numbing and degrading sometimes because the stuff you see on it, for the most part, it's not necessarily true to its full extent. But for me, I was just so absorbed in like, okay, now I have time to focus on aesthetics and body because I'm, puberty's done. I'm still growing up. I'm seeing all these girls on social. Oh man, I want to look like her. Like, look at her shredded abs. I was just so hyper focused and vigilant on body comp and just body image. I didn't realize this back then when I first started working out. I obsessed over it. I looked at what they ate, their entire like day's worth, what they do. And just kind of followed that. And then I started powerlifting because I started lifting weights and heavier, and people said, hey, maybe you should consider competing. And I took that, and because I missed that competitive atmosphere, it's like, you're once an athlete, you're always an athlete. I'm always looking for ways to challenge myself. And I just missed that competitive atmosphere. So I decided, okay, you know what, while I'm in school, I could still do this on the side. And that was great. I still had that bodybuilding mentality of like, I want to eat a certain way, my broccoli, eggs, and, chicken breast, while I train, and I train for strength. It's kind of counterintuitive because when you're training strength, you can't really focus on body fat loss and stuff like that. But I was just so dedicated to this, why can't I look good and also train like crazy? I did that. It completely depleted me. My body hated me for it, but I still did it because I am a perfectionist, like very, this is a lot of athletes, same thing. You just need to be the best of the best. And in order to do that, I had to do super invasive stuff, which would be restricting myself. So for years, I was restricting eating out. I missed out on family events or social events because I was afraid what food would be there. Or every time I went out and I would eat, someone would make some, remarks saying like, oh, like you can eat that? Like, aren't you competing? Or like, you're so fit, like, are you allowed to eat that? Hearing a lot of it was environmental. A lot of people would say things without thinking because they're not necessarily aware of it, and that's fine. I never took it, greatly to heart, but it does add up. So I would avoid social gatherings for that. I stuck to a diet. My family didn't really understand. They always thought that I was way too hard on myself. I just did really hard things on my body. They just didn't really accept it or understand it. In terms of eating disorders and the pandemic, I stopped competing, but I still had that competitive mentality and I still wanted to keep up my athleticism. So I still dieted. Here comes a global pandemic and basically stripped all that away from me. Me being, perfection, just very disciplined and schedule oriented. I was just so fixated on a structure, and then that all got taken out. I couldn't go to school. Schools were closed. I couldn't go to the gyms. Gyms were closed. It was March, still cold. Like I was kind of left in I don't know what to do. And then that resulted to, binge eating, purging. I was formally diagnosed with bulimia. I'm always upset. Like before, I was always obsessing with food, about my body. I ended up having to really seek therapy because of that, because I just, for so many years of restricting, you have no idea how to have a healthy relationship with food or your body or yourself. So it was a lot of learning through that entire process. But yeah, that's when it really hindered my mental health, is when it overconsumed me and I no longer had a linear path, because life's not linear, and I learned it the hard way.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, the whole process, the whole journey, and sort of those points when you really notice those shifts. And I don't know if there's people in the audience who are sort of really interested in learning more about your path, your journey, or resonated with it. But perhaps now that we're going to be shifting the conversation, if you also want to leave contact information or details for anyone who's listening and really would like to follow up with you, feel free to drop that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Matthew and James, I don't want to call you guys a package deal, but I know you guys are used to sharing space together and talking about your work together. I have a little landing page here up on screen to introduce both of you. And I know, Matthew, you have some slides you'd love to share after that point. So I'll give you guys the floor to do a little bit more of an in-depth introduction. Both of you and I have talked about, again, those topics: the singular identity, the athlete therapist relationship, and integration of this work and how it's impacted both of your lives personally and professionally. So I'll pass the floor on to you and take it away.
Yeah, no, thank you. We're so excited to be here. I speak on behalf of James because we just spoke and we're both really excited. So before I start, I think very similar. There's, hearing Alexandra speak, there's a lot of, it resonated quite a bit with me. And every time I hear, a new story or the same story again, I seem to be able to pull a connection and pull that connectivity from someone else's story and relate it to my own. And that just reinforces the human and that we're all very much focused on the divisive labels that we receive. And in this case, the first one on the page that pops out to me, professional soccer athlete, that's something that I aspired to. And that, in a way, was a very divisive thing from myself. It divided Matthew from athlete. And I'll go there in a moment. But, my journey started very much as any soccer athlete, I imagine, as any enthusiast of sport, anyone with an older sibling as well. Dreaming of the name on the back of the jersey and dreaming of playing in a stadium full of thousands of people, and maybe dreaming of signatures and autographs and all those cool things. But ultimately it started with that and being a younger brother and looking up to the older brother. And for whatever reason, he found that, and I found him as a role model. And as we progressed in our lives, it was very much soccer oriented, but there was an element of play there where it was a play. It was a back and forth. It was a me versus him, in the sense that I was always trying to grow and aspire to something and be something, and make him proud and make other people proud. And you'll start to see this common theme. But, that was something that I dove into. That was something that I loved soccer. And when I wasn't playing, I was talking about soccer. When I wasn't talking about soccer, I was playing video games about soccer. And you can start to see that singular identity as it pertains to what Alexandra just meant, where we start to develop this singular identity without any conscious awareness that it's happening, right? And I think the natural progression as you lead forward, we'll fast forward to, rather, I'll give you an overlay of this. And my brother and I grew very close, more probably closer than siblings must grow in dire straits. And I say that because I had a father with drug addiction and mental health disorders. So there was an element of issue there in the home. There was an element of trouble, and soccer was the coping mechanism very much for a lot of it. It was also a passion in that positive light, but it was a coping mechanism in another fashion. And fast forward to progressing through the ranks of grassroots soccer, and it's great, and I love to just kick that ball into the net, and it's great. It becomes something more as we move through the high school space, where you make the soccer team. And I was very much a high achiever. I was a grade 9 playing on the senior soccer team. I was the star of the school, and everybody really liked that. And everyone, and parents and other parents on other teams and coaches, this guy's going to play pro. This guy's going to play pro. You need to take this seriously because you have a real chance. And what happened there was, as you can peel the onion back, there's another layer to that singular identity. So Matthew left his academics as part B of his life. Matthew himself was part C, and being a pro athlete was option A. So we carry through and playing in a professional environment at 16 years old with Toronto FC Academy. Again, that being the precursor to everything that's about to happen, where brother is stripped away. In 2010, I lost my brother in a car accident. And when I lost my brother, I lost that person that I always aspired to. And really what I should have been doing, and we'll bring this back full circle, is aspiring to grow within, and not trying to grow as a pro athlete, not trying to grow in the academic space, not trying to grow in any other form or fashion other than being the best Matthew that Matthew can be. When that got, stripped away from me, I started to develop these patterns and conscious thinking that brought me to this singular identity, realizing that I'm nothing more. I dove further in, and I'm nothing more than this, because this is the only positive that's happening right now. So that developed through singular identity, developed anxiety and depression that I wasn't consciously aware of until I finished my collegiate career. And I went in, I did the college route. I was a student athlete. The demands had never been higher for academia. The demands had never been higher in the athletic space. And truly, it was a crumbling moment for me. I mean, you can look at my collegiate career, and I won 2 national championships with the York University men's soccer team. I got a degree in kinesiology, and one might say that is success. But for me, it wasn't success because I didn't find progress within. I found progress, again, into this professional soccer label. So once I hit there, graduated, there was a big lull period. And really until I found that consciousness and that awareness through mindfulness. Truly, I had been in peak physical form. I had been in terms of technique and the technical ability of the sport. Nobody, I'm sure that you've spoken to or that you can never speak to, would tell you that I was lacking in that department. But what it was bringing it full circle and really addressing the human, and really addressing Matthew as an athlete, Matthew as a person, and how Matthew's tendencies and what's going on in Matthew's life as a modality to understand better that human, so that the output can be greater. That maybe I can, in a healthy way, as Alexandra meant, not resent the very sport that I fell in love with. Once I found that, and it's not necessarily a thing that happened overnight, but once I found it, it was very much a flip of the switch. So for me, finding that purpose and finding that understanding that I was doing it for myself, I much needed to let go of that. I need to do this for my brother. I need to do this for somebody else. I need to take those external validations and the internal validations and let them go. And that letting go process led me to find mindfulness. How could I let go? And very much in the space of mindfulness, very much in guided breathing, visualization, whatever technique, it actually allowed me to propel my performance to that space. I mentioned that lull period where I didn't get to that pro space and my dreams were crushed. Once I found this, it was a flip of a switch. It was a linear equation for me. And I pushed myself into the pro space with a smile on my face. It became very much enjoyable. So, of my athletic career, I maybe only enjoyed the last 3 or 4 years. And that was a revelation for me because I found more of me. right? And I think ultimately that's where Mindframe comes full circle. That was a program that I built to pay it forward. And my overlap with James and what we're doing now in the performance wellness program and that platform is a solution to these athletes, is a solution for the student athlete to take the labels, strip them all away, and find who they are truly. And then we can use that as a as a proponent, as a, we'll call it a springboard for output or for performance, right? And I think in the sports space in general, my experience has led me to performance and then wellness being a byproduct. Hey, I'm going to be an athlete, therefore I'm going to be physically fit. But what about the mental side? What about the holistic approach that wellness isn't necessarily carrying, right? Alexandra shared her story and I shared mine about how being physically fit or chasing performance didn't necessarily bring wellness, right? So we flip that on its head and we bring wellness to the athletes, bring wellness to the students, we bring wellness to the humans and watch performance grow as a result. So I'm very proud of that. That is, for me, the shift in mentality, that is the shift in identity. And that's something that I identify with very much, is bringing that optimal experience to humans so that we can live a better quality of life.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the coattails there. And Matt, as always, I've listened to Matt's story. I've been a part of Matt's story just as he's been a part of mine. And every time I hear it, and Alexandra, thank you for sharing yours as well. I think the vulnerability that gets highlighted and built into being strength is something that we are looking to embrace, because that is true strength. That is the idealization behind performance wellness. So we'll get into that. I just wanted to thank you both for sharing your story publicly, because again, that is, when we share performance wellness, we want people to understand that there is so much more behind the number, underneath the shin pads, the helmet, the stick, the gloves, whatever athletes are wearing. And this is it. So this is my background on the screen. I think I want to just bring it back around to sort of this offshoot of what performance wellness is, and it is starting with the self. And so we'll use the cliche of putting the oxygen mask on first before we can help others. Alexandra brought up sort of navigating purpose and trying to understand what is my greater purpose. Or what is my true purpose? And I don't purport to have those answers, but as a practitioner, I've sat on the side of a table. I've treated numerous athletes. We've had a number of conversations that are dedicated towards getting better, healing, all of these different things. And in having the opportunity to step back from those roles and reflect, the one thing that I can do as a practitioner is connect. And the one thing that we can all do as human beings is start here and start with the self. So as I navigate the self, as I understand how my shoulder moves better, I can perform better. As I understand how to navigate the precipice, instead of getting to the peak, I see the peak and I can turn right, turn left, or find help along the way. And so these are the tools. Sport offers so much positivity. Elements of sport offer so much positivity in terms of outlets and all these other things. It's not that they're all negative, but in the high level competition and then in rec sport, it comes down to sort of contextualizing what components are valued, what components are devalued. And then through our experiences, myself as a practitioner in youth sports, in an international baccalaureate school internationally, and then now sort of in the entrepreneurial space, we're trying to glue together some of the pieces that are out there. And those pieces all come back to, all of us can own a part of the equation of mental health. I am not a mental health practitioner, but I understand how to navigate the physical wellness of human beings into, and how that interplay is not two distinct parts. There is a direct entanglement of mental and physical. And so this is where performance wellness came in. Matt was an athlete at York. I was a practitioner. I got to be on the plane and on the buses and on the sidelines for those two national championships. And in doing so, we had a lot of conversations. None of them were to the depth that they are now, but they were very connected. And we've come back around and put this program together, where we begin with mind and we begin with body, and then we just blur the lines and again strip away that identity. So Matt, I don't know if you could take control of the screen, but we can sort of jump in just to a brief sort of overview, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll just stop sharing my screen now, and Matthew, you should be able to jump in and share a few slides, and we could have about 5 to 7 minutes for the slide share for you guys, and then we'll jump into some roundtable discussion.
Absolutely, no problem. So let's start here. Let's just start with this, and then Matt, you can jump in, take over a little bit of the slideshow too, and then let's do this. Why don't we just do a practical component to this as well? We'll make it 2 to 3 minutes of a practical component. But what you see on the screen, what is movement? When we look at movement as a practitioner or as a strength coach or as an athlete or as a so on and so forth, what tends to happen is that that's a means to an end. That movement, that hip abduction, that rotation of the hip, that flexion of the spine, that is in order to achieve something else, to perform something else better. So we've broken this down and really created this identity of mindfulness within movement. Break down the barriers towards mindfulness or meditation, like throw all those away and like, here it is, it's movement and movement for the movement. So we are taking movement and making it intentful. And by making movement intentful, focusing on the act that is happening for the act that is happening, all of this will make its way into streamlined daily life, but it will also enhance performance, because as I increase the ability to focus, to be attentional or intentional, I am enhancing myself. And there is the linear equation. If I have more access to me, I am tapping into that potential. On the other side, I am better. My performance is enhanced. And so we can get into this on down the road, but that's just a general overview, using what we're doing for what it is instead of a means to an end. Take it, Matt, for mindfulness. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's something that James touched on, and that's the physical entry. And when we look at the mindfulness, we can strip that word away and simply focus on the present moment, the awareness, the conscious awareness, whether that be human potential, whether that be athletic performance. The idea is very much to be in the present moment. When we're in the present moment, the output is greater. And that's what James means when he says the exploration of self. It can be shoulder or it can be breath, right? Breath is not something that is physical. There is a physical action, but by applying attentional focus to those components, we are being present with those components. We are experiencing that flow that's keeping us in the present moment. And as a result, we're going to be able to breathe better. As a result, we're going to be able to move that shoulder better. As a result, we're going to be able to provide a better level of care. And that's not done through our modalities. That is done through exploring the self. So I always like to take this mountain image, and I like to pose the question, what is it that we gain out of the present moment? Well, we either gain power through stillness. It is something that is active. To actually be still in the mind, to actually be still in the body is an active component, especially in our Western society where we are always ramping up. If we can ramp that down, we can not only find power in that stillness, just like the mountain never moves, but it's immovable at the same time. So at the same time, we look at the pond. So we can be the mountain, or we can be the pond that is quite clear. We can see right to the bottom, but only when it's not raining. When it's raining and we're clouded with thoughts, we can't see our true self. So we can't go within and we can't go without into the external environment unless we are here. And that is the exploration of human potential that is found simply through awareness, that is found simply through the curiosity in the mind rather than the expectation. So clearing the mind, letting go of those things, as I mentioned, the process of letting go is mindfulness, and being present with what is, right? Whether that be extraordinary or not extraordinary, whether that be a happiness or a sadness. And I think when we sit with those things, they begin to lose their power. We begin to befriend them. So, I mean, very simply, it's just resilience in body and mind, right? So that is the framework for everything. That is the groundwork that we lay, and it's resilience, whether it be through the shoulder or whether it be through the breathing or a visualization technique. So James and I are very pleased to have worked with athletes, and these are the gaps that we've identified. So just to give context, this program was pre-collegiate athletes. This is 18-year-olds, basically, that were part of a high-performing soccer program that we pulled, that have all committed, by the way, to either U Sports or a D1 school, who will be entering that student athlete label very soon. And these are the pressures that they have fear in sport. And when we look at a lot of them, they're all external, right? We feel the pressure. It can be internal as well, but a lot of them are the external that can be somewhat toxified by the sports space, right? We think about the athletes and the pressure to perform, and a lot of that pressure is letting the team down, or fear of not reaching our goals, or being looked down upon by teammates. So these are the gaps that we've identified through simply polling them, through simply having vulnerable discussions, right? We talk about where does their confidence come from, right? And we'll touch on all three of those very quickly. But if we look at teammates, coaches, and recent performances, and then obviously past successes being an extension of that, teammates and coaches and external validation, right? If we don't receive that because that individual is not willing to give, And we're going to go hungry when it comes to looking for food in that place, right? So when we look at recent performances and past successes, this is one of the most powerful revelations that this particular athlete that had. When they mentioned recent performances, I asked them, well, what happens if in sport or on a test, you didn't do so well the last time around? And they were speechless. They had nothing to say. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately that can spiral, right? If I look to my last game and it wasn't a great game, if I look to my last test and it wasn't a last test, where do I pull that confidence from? So the idea is very much to be the pond, or simply show yourself that you're the mountain and find that within, because that is a stable source of confidence. That is a stable source of emotional regulation. And that is a stable source of resilience, right? So our program shakes down like this. It's very much an exploration of self. And what's most important in the interest of time, Chris, is moving this how it works. Let's skip down to this how it works. We know why it's important, but how it works is very important. And I'll kick it over to James for that.
Yeah, this model down at the bottom, I had an opportunity to present nationally. I had an opportunity to present at a chiropractic college this past weekend. And this is one that I see as a problem in our healthcare system, as part of the healthcare system, as part of the support system to student athletes, to human beings, is the dependence on the practitioner. For me, the practitioner to create greater dependence on myself, for an athlete to need me to get better, that's part of the equation, sure, early on. But if that doesn't transition to flip in terms of the ratio, then we are just enhancing the problem. And so through performance wellness, through our relationships, through connecting, you connecting with self, us guiding you to you have the tools and you utilize them the way that you see fit in your own environment. And so the idea very much is that early on, we look at an 80-20 where, sure, you get on the bike, we show you the helmet, we show you the steering wheel, we show you the handlebars, the pedals, all of these things. But as we transition through, we're stripping away all of those things. We're going to leave the helmet on. But as we get to the end, you're riding the bike on your own. And the idea here very much is fall, get back up, fall, get back up, but you're getting back up each time with greater understanding and greater independence, greater separation from me, the practitioner, as the example, and greater dependence on you yourself. And so again, as we work towards the peak, we see the peak first, and we can either turn, or ask for help, because we're identifying that within ourselves. And I think this is actionable. I know this is actionable. We feel that this is an unmatched program in terms of we're taking down some barriers because we're entering it through a physical space. And again, neither of us is a mental health practitioner, but we all experience this sway on mental health, and we utilize the resources around us to create a community. It truly does take a village, but that model right there is one that we are extremely proud to sort of live by and to make foundational to what we're doing. And Chris, I don't know how much time we have before you want to get to questions. If we have like a minute, we can just go through a breath work. That'd be cool. Is that good or no?
I think we could do a minute and then we can wrap up and switch to our roundtable questions I have for all of you. But yeah, absolutely. If I think a lot of people would love to see or experience the
Sure.
the moment in action. So
yeah, beautiful. So we'll start with this a simple breath work. Thank you for that. We'll take a minute. So I'll invite anybody and everybody who's willing to just find your place in your seat, in your chair, and understand that you are your own support. So if you are physically able, draw yourself off of the back of the chair, off of the couch, firmly plant your feet on the floor and erect your spine. So sitting up as tall as possible, top of the skull to the ceiling, base of the spine, seated and supported, feet in contact with the ground. If you're comfortable doing so, just gently close the eyes. Allow the eyelids to touch. And simply begin to follow the rhythm of the breath. Allowing the breath to flow in and allowing the breath to flow out. And then if willing and able, gently take your right hand and place it on your belly, on your abdomen. Take the left hand and place it on the chest. Eyes can open if you're more comfortable doing so, or simply just leaving the eyes closed to rest. Continue to follow the rhythm of the breath. And I'm just going to coach you through these next 3 breath cycles. The inhale, we're going to inflate the abdomen, then up into the chest, and then up into the shoulders. We'll have a brief pause, and then we're going to follow that same rhythm on the exhale with the abdomen collapsing first, then the chest, then the shoulders. Here we go. Let's inhale, abdomen, chest, shoulders. Pause at the top. And exhale, abdomen, chest, shoulders. Inhale, abdomen, lower rib cage, then the chest, then the shoulders. Pause at the top. And exhale slowly and fully through the abdomen, the chest, and the shoulders. One final time. Inhale, abdomen, chest, shoulders, pausing at the top, and then exhaling, abdomen, chest, shoulders. Gently release the hands, leaving the eyes closed. Come back to the gentle rhythm of the breath. And let's acknowledge stress. Stress is something that we carry. It's something that we need. It's also a passive thing that happens to humans. We don't have to do anything to engage with stress. It's there. Whether it's a dinosaur chasing us or our taxes due next week, it's always there. Relaxation, on the other hand, is a completely active thing for humans. We must engage with relaxation. The breath can take us there. Movement can take us there. But we have to engage with it. You can open your eyes, and I'll thank you for participating and taking the 3, 5, 7 breaths for yourself. Our system is constantly being ramped up. We need to take the time to down-regulate, to tap into the parasympathetics. So we get into science, we get into all these other things if and when we have the time to do so, but happy to be here again. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. And Chris, please do your thing.
Thank you both so much for the detailed explanation and how your process works. I align with mindful approaches when it comes to my own clinical work, and I think obviously we probably all know it's been a very much more advertised, prominent thing in more recent years, almost to the point where it's become diluted and people don't see the clarity around how it can function in a space. So I think, you know, for myself, hopefully for people in the audience to see that it's an integrative process with all these other pieces of the puzzle, like you said, and it's not a nebulous thing when you actually lay it out. I'm sure that's something that, you know, I appreciate and that other people do appreciate. We have about 15 minutes left just for everyone in the audience, and I have a few topics of roundtable discussion that I would love to bring back to the collective group of guests here today. So I'm going to bring my slides back into the equation. And you all come from different but complementary perspectives in the space. And as I mentioned earlier on, right, we are really focused on putting together this toolkit, this playbook, this resource repository for people who work with our athletes on campus, for athletes themselves, for people that are connected to the policies that are dictated around student athlete experiences. So I have a number of questions here. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The first one, and a lot of these topics came from me reaching out to our community saying, hey, what do you guys need? The coaches, the athletic trainers, the directors, the counselors, the wellness staff that work with athletes, what's needed to be talked about in this playbook? And despite the advancements we've probably been making in this idea of what is mental health, what is the mind-body connection, what is the athlete experience, there is still a lot of discussion around, well, the stigma is still there. And it's not only there for you know, the general population, but probably still heightened for the student athlete who has to be that warrior on the field, warrior in their lives. And I'm curious to know, and maybe Alex, Salome, I'll pass it to you for the first take on this. Where do you think this stands from your vantage point in the world of post-secondary athletics here and now in 2021? And further to that, what environmental or cultural elements do you think need to be in place to keep reducing and normalizing that mental health as a part of a process and a personal journey?
Thanks, Chris. And I think this is a really good question, and it's definitely something that we've certainly seen a lot of work in this area. We've seen a lot of athletes coming out and speaking about their struggles with mental health, and it's certainly one of the major major first steps working in COVID. You tend to hear doorbells. It's certainly one of the first steps in helping to really break down a lot of the silos that exist. And what it's where it gets challenging in particular, and what I'm finding is you have to have two things. You have to have buy-in at the top, certainly, to help promote that mental health, whether it's at the athletics department, but you also have to have buy-in from coaches. And I know we discussed this previously in terms of some of the factors when it comes to that, and making sure that athletes feel like they can be supported, making sure that you're having these conversations, even casually at first with athletes, is an important part, and really trying to build out a system where athletes can feel comfortable speaking about their mental health, whether it's with somebody in a position of higher authority or just speaking amongst themselves. So a lot of what we try to do and encourage with our program is to teach athletes that to have these conversations, and that's why it really requires buy-in from all athletes when we do deliver the program, because you need to know that the guy next to you has received having somebody next to you who's also received some sort of component of training and feeling comfortable with that conversation topic already is helping break down some of those concerns where we find that somebody might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'm struggling with my mental health, but nobody else seems to be having any issues. Why should I talk to anybody else? But when we encourage these conversations, at least in our experience, a lot of athletes tend to kind of say, oh, I had a similar experience, or I've struggled. And encouraging these conversations at a team level is also incredibly important. I hope that kind of answers your question.
No, absolutely. I think it's hugely important, and exactly what you're saying. And I'll pass it on, Alexandra. I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to that. And before you jump in, I also wanted to just backtrack for a second. Matthew, James, feel free in the chat to also share your contact information with the audience. I'm sure there's a number of people that would love to reach out to you afterwards. But Alexandra, would love to hear your perspective surrounding the stigma, and maybe what you think is something that could really help continue this process of peeling those layers away from it.
Yeah, so actually, Alex pointed out a really good point, talking about, it's never really highly discussed, mental health, or any sort of, it's kind of taboo in athleticism, especially, I was thinking just now, if coaches and teachers put in just as much effort in terms of teaching or coaching their students or athletes on physical performance, but put the same amount of effort in mental performance and just overall mental awareness, I feel like the amount of mental health issues would be reduced by so much. It's never discussed. That's kind of why I am where I am now, and why I pursued my master's in the first place, is to educate other people and just learn more about our psyche. But it started off literally me asking other fellow athletes or friends of mine, like, hey, do you have days where you feel like this? Or, I've been feeling like this for about 3 weeks now, but I'm eating the same way. I'm training the same way. Like, what's going on? And then next thing you know, I was over exercising, and I completely reached like a threshold, and just like my mental state was depleted, and I wasn't even aware of that. Like, a lot of times it's either misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or just never discussed, period. I wasn't even, these issues weren't necessarily apparent until I really had time to sit down with my thoughts. Not like I had a choice, we were all in lockdown, but the benefit of that lockdown, for me at least, it forced me to sit down and literally depict exactly where things went wrong and how we can better improve society in general when discussing this stigma, and making it less stigmatized, and people to become more confident and openly discuss about these issues, because some athletes may not even know that they're suffering from mental health issues. I'm sure many of us can agree on that. Until it reaches its, it's funny, it has to reach a really bad point in your life for you to kind of have a reality check or really convince an athlete, especially. I always like talk about athletes being a whole different specimen because they are so hardworking, independent, and so structured and, vigilant about things that it's almost, they brush off these other things that are just not as relevant when they are. It's just going to hit you sooner or later. So yes, that's where I stand with the secondary athletics.
Thanks. No, I appreciate the response, and I think you've highlighted this idea that as people in general, but maybe athletes more extreme because of environmental factors, we could get caught in these echo chambers of what appears to be the norm, the norm of this is what everyone seems to be doing and everyone's keeping it to themselves. And I'm going to just make assumptions that everyone seems to be doing okay, even though on the inside, I don't seem to be. And talk about, being isolated in this virtual space more and more often over the past year and how much that can amplify being in our own echo chambers. This transcends athletics, but probably again amplified in that world. I was just noticing also, I have a couple other roundtable discussion items, but it's 2:11, and I want to make sure we tackle some of the questions that were being asked in the Q&A section. I know one of them was typed answer while the discussion was going on, so I appreciate that. But I'm going to shift gears and go to a couple of those questions just to make sure we wrap those up before moving on. There's an initial question, and I think this might have been asked earlier on, but it was when did you realize it was time to move on from your sport, and what was that process like? And I think everyone has had some experience to a certain degree of doing that. I know I certainly did it a couple of times, and it was almost like my body was telling me, you know what, you could keep playing, but you're going to be pretty miserable waking up every day in pain. But I'm wondering, we've all had this transition to and into and out of different athletic pursuits and sports. Does anyone want to try to tackle that question or tell a little bit briefly of their story of maybe coming to this realization that it's time for a bit of a change, whether it be with the sport in general or a relationship to the sport?
Yeah, I can go, Chris, if that's...
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Matthew.
No, I think it's a great question, and I'm glad it's asked, because how do you know when you know, right? And really, we don't know unless we go. And I think that's an important term coined by James himself, but one that, again, being my mentor, I really value what he says. And when we think about that, we can apply it to contextually to our own life. So perhaps I'll address it in terms of the professional sports aspect. And as I entered that space, or as I exited the collegiate space, I realized that my relationship was unhealthy. And I think, how do you know when it's time to walk away is knowing that there are certain things that are and are not helpful, and they do not serve you. Perhaps they did, but they do not any longer. And I think, when we can constantly check in with ourselves and bring ourselves to that awareness, I think it becomes a little bit more clear. And for myself, I'll parallel this and give you context in my life. I didn't necessarily walk away from the sport at that moment, in that sort of, as I mentioned, that lull between being a collegiate athlete and breaking into the pro rank. But what happened with me was very much an ultimatum into the approach to sport. As I mentioned, I addressed the unhealthy relationship that I did possess with sport. And in order to get to that point, I addressed that if I was able to explore those edges and understand that there needed to be a shift in the mentality, in the approach to sport, rather to focus on the enjoyment of the sport, rather to do it for the love and the passion. When that gets clouded, I think it's an easy indicator as to when it's time to walk away. Ultimately, the individual knows. But for me, as I bring it full circle to the present day, what happened with this exploration of finding a level of care and providing that level of care for athletes, I found very much myself moving the professional athlete label to 1B rather than 1A. And I say that because it's a very difficult transition, as we all know, out of athletics and all that it brings. And especially in the pro sports space, there's a lot of ego involved. I think even with yourself, right? And this, as Alexandra had touched on, it gets, the compliments are nice, and sometimes you don't really know, but you're receiving them, and it can be a little bit more difficult to cling to those. And I think once that we are able to let go of something, we're able to love it better from a distance, right? And I think in that space, when that shift was made, I was able to progress in my career rather than let go. I let go of the mentality, right? It wasn't necessarily the sport itself that was toxic. It was the approach that I had to sport. So bringing that to a full consciousness, I realized that one or the other needed to change, the mentality or simply, a halt in performance and in sport in general. So I think it's a very interesting concept, but I think an exploration of understanding what our relationship to that one thing is and establishing that ability to let go of it, right? And once you're able to let go, I'm fine. I always say to James, I'm fine retiring tomorrow from professional sports because I found that relationship that is healthy for me in the sport, right? Whether that be continuing recreationally and using it for exercise or using it to be social with, I don't know, other alumni, whatever the idea is, it's finding that healthy relationship and establishing a healthy, positive mindset towards that, rather than, as Alexandra and I have shown, we can very easily turn something positive into something negative, right? All in a construct. So I hope that answers the question. I try to do so within the context of my own life, because ultimately everybody has their own context, right?
Absolutely. And there was no quick answer to the question other than someone going through their process, but you were talking and it reminded me of a book. And, we always get asked as youngsters growing up, the what do you want to become question. And I know of a book that's a converted children's story. And it was written with the title, Who Do I Want to Become, instead of What Do I Want to Become? And I think that's sort of this shift that you're describing that just happens to different people at different phases of life. And naturally with the student athlete, maybe there's somewhat of a forced, reckoning point at an early stage of life when it's like, okay, this is what I've been doing, this is what my life's been about, and now what kind of thing. So your words are words of wisdom for lots of people who are probably exploring that phase of life as they come. And I hate to say it, guys, we have to wrap it up here. It's 2:15 and we're at the end point. I know we could probably keep talking, but I really appreciate all of you contributing. This was a couple of months in the making with some planning discussions, and I hope everyone who's been in the audience for part or all of the session found something of value in the experience. And feel free to reach out to any of us. I know there are a couple more questions about asking about resources and potential certifications. So you have all of the contact information of all the participants here. We'd love to give you as much information as we can, at least to partially answer those questions. And outside of that, I look forward to us all connecting again to continue these discussions. And I hope everyone keeps their eyes and ears peeled for news about the next steps of our toolkit project that's coming up. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.